many people do not realize that something has forever qualitatively been changed in this world. We are not living in a protective world anymore. We not even the facade that there are human rights or a judge can save us from any problem, or when we are arrested, we will be treated within the confines of the law. We are literally being conditioned for a world where everything and anything can happen to you and nobody is going to protect you.
We're seeing, oh, we just saw a woman get killed, shot in the face 3 times by an ICE agent, and people are still like not getting it. They're not getting that we're now being ruled by a police state that is beyond our borders, by a surveillance state that is embedded, as Vanessa said, with Palantir, and not just even that, with an AI technology that is pretty much taken over. We just saw what happened with Grok, and how we can't even know what's real and what's not. It's getting so hard to discern.
It's baffling, but people are defending the ICE officers to the extent that they, and you will always see that it doesn't matter how bad the stuff that's going on is, people keep defending it. And I'm thinking in myself, guys, this can happen to you. This can happen to your mother, your sister, to anyone you know. Are you sure you want to defend this?
Of course, they learned in Iraq to start using proxies. And Russia actually pretty much does the same. Because effectively, who's fighting in Ukraine? Right. Originally, it was the Chechens. Then, I mean, there's even stories here of Russia recruiting Palestinians from the refugee camps in Lebanon and paying them to go and fight in Ukraine.
They were a lot of corporations were making a lot of profit since the Ukraine war started. So there you have. So what they also showed was that, for example, certain gas or oil corporations, where their profits were going down, 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 down. Ukraine war, bam, up. On both sides, US corporations and Russian corporations.
The one thing that drives me insane is when people, even in resistance countries, are saying, no, if we just keep up a war of attrition, America is dying, Israel is dying. No, it isn't. Because it's not about that nation state. It's about the ruling transnational elite that have already, by the way, a foothold in every single country in the world. So you're under threat, whether Israel falls or the US appears to fall. I don't think it will. Populations will fall because we're dispensable.
I think it will be a good conversation as usual. So let's begin.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Good day, everyone. We are here again with the sisters of the show, Vanessa, Beeley, and Fiorella, Isabel. And we have not been, done a show for a while, Peter and myself. Peter is right now busy, so it's me only, because we have all been very, very busy with also our jobs, and also we were actually receiving comments from people like, where are you guys, where are you? So I was like, okay, we need to do another show, and with who better to talk about the state of affairs and where the world is than with the two of you, two of my very favorite geopolitical analysts. And I wanted to talk with you guys about a couple of things that are bothering me when it comes to where we are today. And I think I could start with a question, or actually, yes, with a question, and that is the following. We have been hearing now for more than a decade at least that the United States is in decline. I've written an article on my Substack about it. I used a thumbnail, or I used a front picture of many of the thumbnails that I always see on YouTube, for example, from Richard Wolff. The US is in decline, the US is over, empire is in decline, empire is over, it's time of socialism, blah, 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 blah. I don't get me wrong. It's a nice copium and hopium if you to read these things and to hear these things. But I've been wrestling with the things that we see today, in particular, and I've also been writing about that. I wonder actually if the U.S. is really in decline, or at least U.S. imperialism is in decline. I get increasingly the feeling that it is reviving and it is strengthening in many ways. Is U.S. society in decline? Yes. If we ask that question, I would say yes. Is U.S. imperialism in decline? I doubt it personally. I see U.S. on a winning streak. I don't know how you guys see that. And then related to that is another question I had in my mind. I was coincidentally in a different corner of YouTube where I suddenly was confronted with very new personalities. And then you see that we are often in filter bubbles ourselves, where people were discussing imperialism from a more financial and how can you say that, a transnational capital kind of perspective. And that was in the corner of all those Bitcoin guys. And usually I avoided these kinds of channels because I always found them a little bit kooky. But I must say that's also a bit arrogant, because that is already, how do you say it? That's already judging people before you really, really know them. And I realized there are actually some very interesting personalities among these people. And they have actually started to make me think a lot, especially the question, are we getting imperialism wrong? That is my question also, because we are, I really realize we are a bit in what you could call the nation state corner of the anti-imperialist kind of corner of YouTube. That is, we're talking about China, we're talking about America, and often we're talking about personalities related to these nation states like Trump and Putin. And while these are, of course, very important, I wonder if these personalities are not just what you could call piñatas. Okay, that is that the public can beat on them. They are the kind of distraction, whilst there is a very powerful transnational capitalist elite behind them that we hardly know about, that is actually running things, and that we should stop really focusing purely on those battles between nation states. That increasingly becomes a bit redundant, or even I don't know. It may even be the wrong angle to see all these things. So that's a lot of thoughts that come up, and I don't know if you guys have anything to respond to that. Maybe I can start with you, Fiorella.
Yeah. So in the from the perspective of the United States declining, I think what we need to talk about is the class perspective. So in terms of the class perspective, we're talking about the people of the United States. I have been there very recently, and things are declining. Businesses are closing down. When people have money, when there's like a movement in the economy, people go out and they shop and they spend money. That's not really happening as much anymore as it used to. There's a lot of decline, for example, in the retail industry. The banking industry is in decline. I have friends that work in various sectors of different areas, whether it's health or banking or real estate, and they're all like going through it right now. People don't even want to be in healthcare because of everything that happened with COVID and the pandemic. And just in general, people are very depressed. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of drug use. So that tells you that, yes, society is in decline. And I did interview Richard Wolff, and I did actually talk to him about this stuff. And I did say, I do agree that the empire as we knew it is in decline, but I don't think that the in terms of U.S. imperialism that has now shifted to a more international, a transnational type of elite class is in decline. What I think we are seeing is the shift from the United States and say Europe to than now China, Russia, and other major players. But you're still seeing the class divide between the political billionaire class elite versus everybody else. And I think that's what's confusing a lot of people. And yeah, there's like construction in the background, and I don't know what's going on. So I'm going to mute myself once I'm done talking.
Ah,
No, I was actually thinking, what is that scary sound? Like there's some ghost in my machine or something. Anyway,
it did sound very odd.
yeah. So, Vanessa, do you have anything to comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because before we came on, Karim and I were, well, actually, you were telling me about someone you watched, and I came in and said, was it Simon Dixon? But we actually watched two different interviews with him, which is even weirder, right? Because the one I watched was with Professor Zhang. So it was really interesting to see the juxtaposition of two overlapping points of view, but diverging points of view in some instances. But two people that obviously had a lot of respect for each other and were very open to changing opinions if certain factors came into play. And I think, I mean, I know Fee and I have been talking certainly for some time about the overlap of the transnational ruling elite, the oligarchy, and that kind of overrides the nation state. It overrides governmental policy, or as you said, the actors in place to effectively roll out one part of the roadmap. I mean, you know, if you just look at the progression from the first Trump administration to the Biden administration to the second Trump administration, you can see effectively how it locks together, how it's just three pieces of a jigsaw arriving to the destination that the deep state, the military industrial complex, the technocratic complex want the world to be at in time for the next president or power figure who's going to actually front the policies from behind the scenes. And with Trump, it's perfectly clear. He's certainly not a peace president. He's certainly putting the US dollar into free fall through his actions. He's increasing US debt, which of course then increases inflation and poverty, which is what you're seeing with the decline of the population. And then, as Simon Dixon pointed out, it pushes the money into the stock market, into the hands of the global oligarchy, which then eventually results in it being contained within the corporatocracy. And then you have kind of the overarching battles between the financial complex and the technical or the technology complex. And that's very much what you're seeing. The takeover of companies like Palantir, that are now becoming literally more powerful than government, both in the US and now in the UK. I mean, a 240 million contract has just been signed in the UK. And when you listen to people like Peter Thiel or Alex Karp, who in my opinion is utterly insane, when he's literally bragging about the fact that they'll kill the enemies of the US. They don't have a problem with this. So this, in a way, is the facade is dropping. The facade of nation states, the facade of governments having power is melting away. And we're actually seeing probably the first layers of the real powers behind the throne, in my opinion. And Palantir and other such like that are very much representing that first layer. And then I have another aspect to this, which if we look at, let's say, Pax Americana, is kind of weakening. I see the entire Zionist movement, which is very much embedded in that transnational ruling elite. Let's face it, if we look at Venezuela, who's benefiting? Zionist or Zionim supporters of Zionism in the United States are benefiting from the financial fallout from what happened in Venezuela. The same potentially in Greenland. So they're very well placed in that transnational oligarchy complex globally, not only in the US, the UK, the EU, but also in Russia, even in China, and across the world, certainly in India, for example. The Gulf states are part of the Zionist bloc. They were created to be so. They can't really be seen separately. They're client states of that Zionist bloc, which is based on trade and economy and technology. So it's created to actually be, if you like, the central hub of that technocracy that is now coming into play. And on the other side, from a military industrial complex perspective, it's almost how I see it. The parasite is eating the host, right? Israel, which is only one component of that Zionist bloc, is literally eating the host. So the US is in decline to a degree. And the parasite is coming to power, it's coming to prominence now through that economic infiltration of all sectors of society and industry, health, education, in all the countries where it's embedded itself. I don't know if that makes
I
sense.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Vanessa said. In terms of, because I get so angry about this, because I'll see like a lot of the multipolarity crazy people say, that's it. The United States is done, is finished. They're absolutely, imperialism is dead. As I see what has happened in Gaza, as I see what's happened in Syria, as I see what's happened in Venezuela, as I see the threats against Mexico and against pretty much the entirety of Latin America. I mean, we've talked about how, yeah, Cuba. I mean, we've talked about pretty much all of the Vanessa and I about how there is a war against Latin America, right? We're seeing, and we knew this. We talked about this before Donald Trump came into the presidency, and we knew that Donald Trump was going to point his gun at Latin America and at West Asia, because that was the plan. And that's exactly what's happened. But as Vanessa said, there's the expansion of Zionism, and in this type of rhetoric that we're getting from a lot of analysts, a lot of journalists that say, the US is finished, everything, that's it. It's like I in some ways I get it, because I see that there is a decline, but it's not the decline of the ruling elite. And that's what people need to understand, that as time progresses, we can see that little matters that you're representing the state of the United States. It doesn't really matter anymore that you're representing the UK, that you are representing Russia, because what I'm seeing now, especially in these coordinated talks between the Russian, the Kremlin, basically through Kirill Dmitriev and Stephen Witkoff, the conversations that are happening between peace in Ukraine have a lot to do with economics. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about an economic transactional type of relationship that supersedes, I think, this need for war. And I think it's becoming more theatrical in terms of the aspect of World War III. It's World War III every day. When, for example, they said it was World War III again when the Americans captured the Russian vessel. And so it was like, what happened? Well, they let the Russians go, and there was only two Russians there. The rest were mainly Ukrainians and a couple others. And so people just say these things, and it gets my blood boiling, because I'm like, I see do you see what's happening here? Perhaps, as Vanessa said, it's not necessarily that it's the United States alone anymore, but what we're seeing is this idea, this, I would say, imperialist driven, very just evil type of mentality is expanding in many ways. It's not lessening in that sense. It's actually growing, and we can see it through the actions. And I don't know, I don't think it's just hopium. I think people just are confused because they are seeing like society decline, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're looking at it in the right terms. And where we're going now, this multipolar world is going to be just another iteration of another transnational ruling elite. And now there's just going to be more people at the table. And this is something the three of us have been talking about for some time when it comes to multipolarity, that there isn't any equity in it. But But now it's becoming extremely clear that a lot of these things, whether it's the war in Ukraine or any other, I would say, coming conflict like what we're going to see the United States is clearly after Iran right now. I think what you're going to see is a difference between the the actual resistance forces that are under attack. It's this mentality too of resistance that is under attack, and that's why Venezuela is so representative of that, because they have been able to withstand U.S. hegemony despite a lot of suffering for a very long time. And even Cuba, you can talk about how they've done the same. And now you're just seeing that be under attack directly out front without any covert type of rhetoric. Now, as we said, it's overt, and Donald Trump is very good to do this because his supporters, a lot of them, no matter what he does, they justify it. We're seeing Americans be jailed, American citizens be jailed by ICE. And we're seeing, oh, we just saw a woman get killed, shot in the face 3 times by an ICE agent, and people are still like not getting it. They're not getting that we're now being ruled by a police state that is beyond our borders, by a surveillance state that is embedded, as Vanessa said, with Palantir, and not just even that, with an AI technology that is pretty much taken over. We just saw what happened with Grok, and how we can't even know what's real and what's not. It's getting so hard to discern, and a lot of these influencers online get away with spreading false information that completely is used and weaponized in a propaganda internet type of psychological war that we're witnessing now, to twist things against actual resistance sectors. And I think that's also a dangerous aspect of this too. You're muted.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, I don't know what's going on. This is a new program, so I have to do a lot of editing later on. I'll do a lot of editing later on. So anyway, yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, you guys, I was just saying, you guys say so many things that could be worthy of a complete conversation. I was writing everything down. I was like, oh yeah, yeah, this, oh yeah, yeah, that. So there's so many important things you touch on. So let me see if I can touch on a few of them. So first of all, what you say about Russia and how it relates to imperialism and the United States and all these kind of things. And I don't know if it was Vanessa in one of the recent interviews. It could be about the discussion that there is a bit of a bromance between Trump and Putin, and that relationships are actually going a little bit better again now between Russia and the United States, and that they're opening certain kinds of organizations in each other's countries and that kind of stuff. So these things are, I think, on a very important developments to focus on. But there's something else I noticed. I had a couple of Chinese students in one of my courses here in China who did a presentation on the Ukraine war. And and it was in my course International Relations, and they showed me some very interesting graphs. And I'm going to see if I can find that PowerPoint to see if I can use those graphs in one of my shows. And what they showed was that on both sides of the Atlantic, they were a lot of organizations or corporations were making a lot of profit since the Ukraine war started. So there you have. So what they also showed was that, for example, certain gas or oil corporations where their profits were going down, 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 down. Ukraine war, bam, up on both sides, U.S. corporations and Russian corporations. And you could just see in that graph that the years that it went down, 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 that probably behind the scenes these corporations would have been whining daily, guys, we need a war, guys, we need a war, guys, we need a war, guys, we need a war. Finally, the war came in Ukraine. The profits on both sides shot up. So you actually have a war going on with hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people on the ground, killing and murdering each other, whilst the two leaders that are so called against each other and waging war in Ukraine are literally filling the pockets of the people that are behind them and are having conversations over the phone and are meeting each other under the enjoyment of a wine and a coffee. And I mean, the deeper you think about it, the more you realize how it's all a freaking spectacle. And the common folk is killing and murdering each other and hating each other online, while those with all the power are simply benefiting. And I think the Ukraine war, when you see it from that perspective, you can almost stop thinking in terms of nation states and presidents and leaders being against each other. It was so revealing, these graphs that my students showed. It was actually, it made me feel, how can you say, almost like an existential crisis. I knew it. I knew this was happening, but it was so visible that I was like, we're just completely being played here and people are dying en masse, and yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to respond to that. I see, Vanessa, you were writing something down, so I guess you wanted to react on something I said.
No, I mean it's who wrote War is a Racket? Was that God, my mind's gone blank now.
Smedley Butler, or
Smedley Butler, yeah. And the ruling elite always, that's the point. They always benefit from these wars, whether it's resources, whether it's the military industrial complex, whether it's new alliances, across the board, they profit from it while they're sending literally their own people to die. Although nowadays, of course, they learned in Iraq to start using proxies. And Russia actually pretty much does the same. Because effectively, who's fighting in Ukraine? Right. Originally, it was the Chechens. Then, I mean, there's even stories here of Russia recruiting Palestinians from the refugee camps in Lebanon and paying them to go and fight in Ukraine. They recruited Syrians when President Assad was still in power, and when pretty much most of the territory in Syria had been regained, they started recruiting Syrians to go and fight in Ukraine. Wagner was fighting in Ukraine. Do you know what I mean? So it's all of them use private military contractors or proxies. Of course, the West uses Boko Haram, ISIS, Al Qaeda, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, etc. Saudi Arabia in Yemen is using proxies in the south of Yemen, UAE, which is effectively an outreach agent, more so even than Saudi Arabia for Israel, is now vying with Saudi Arabia for influence and power in Yemen and in the Horn of Africa, the recognition of Somaliland. Now, Saudi is against that because who is effectively settling on that land on behalf of Israel? It's the UAE, the same in Sudan, right? So when you actually look at that, then you start to understand that from their perspective, these wars aren't really national interest wars. They're resource wars, they're territory wars, they're influence spheres of influence, protection wars of economic corridors and of spheres of influence around them. That's why Iran, to some extent, will be protected by both China and Russia, because it's essential, even as a landmass, to the North-South Trade Corridor, to the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's right on the southern border of Russia. So for Russia, it doesn't want instability in Iran. So when you start to understand the reasons why they come to the support of a nation, particularly when it's in their sphere of influence, when it can have a direct impact on their own national security. Venezuela can't. Let's be clear. From a perspective of Latin America, it's not in the direct sphere of influence of Russia and China, so therefore it's of less importance than Iran, if that makes sense. So in a way, I find it very liberating, because once you understand that, you can start unlocking the policies. You can start understanding them. Like, for example, in Syria, Russia is probably at some point going to be aligned with France, for example, because both of them want a centralized government and regions with some degree of autonomy, but to keep the territorial integrity of Syria. Israel and Washington want to break Syria down into sectarian statelets that are going to continuously be at war with each other so they can be controlled from afar by the US and by Israel. The same in Yemen. Saudi Arabia, effectively, from the very beginning, pre-2015, it wanted to break Yemen down into 6 sectarian statelets with the Ansarullah resistance basically isolated in the middle with no access to sea or to borders, right? So you're going to see competition, and people are going to be, like Fee said, they're going to be scratching their heads and like, why is Russia aligning with France? Or why is Russia aligning? It's unlikely to align with the UK or the EU, because in my opinion, the US and Russian alliance is going to be targeting the EU and the UK effectively. So it's, for me, it's kind of, it's a journey to understanding, but the more you understand and the more you strip away all of the ideology, which is kind of projected onto them by many influencers and commentators and analysts and so on. And this, like Fee said, the one thing that drives me insane is when people, even in resistance countries, are saying, no, if we just keep up a war of attrition, America is dying, Israel is dying. No, it isn't. Because it's not about that nation state. It's about the ruling transnational elite that have already, by the way, a foothold in every single country in the world. So you're under threat whether Israel falls or the US appears to fall. I don't think it will. Populations will fall because we're dispensable. That's very clear when you listen to people like Palantir talking, or even Trump, any of the ruling class right now. If you hear them speaking, they don't, give a shit about their populations. They're not interested in their opinions since the Iraq War in the UK. That was the last time, really, until Palestine, that people went out on the streets. And the government is very clear. We don't care what you think. We're going to turn you in. We're going to classify you as terrorist, because actually, we're not going to react in any way positively to your concerns about what this government is doing. We don't represent you. We represent who is paying us to sit on these seats in Parliament or in Congress.
Yeah, and the genocide should of course have already shown us that they really, really do not care about any of us and any of and of human life. And let's be honest, they don't even care about each other. I think that elite world just completely destroys humanity. That's what an unlimited amount of money does to the human brain and the human soul. And what you're saying is so true. People are saying America is in decline, the West is in decline, this and this and that. Uh, I'd like to remind people that elites in poor countries are not poor. So even when we are looking at very poor countries in Asia, for example, or in Latin America, the elites are doing just fine. And we can now see that on a macro level, the elites will be just fine when the United States, all the society is so to speak collapsing, slowly collapsing into a zombie-like existence where we are disconnected from each other, where we don't talk to each other anymore, when we just look at and talk to AI, and we are confused and we don't understand, and we have to survive from bill to bill to bill. So we have to work hard to be able to pay the bills. And I think that's what we are seeing on a global level. I must say less so here in China, where there's actually investment in society itself and the population. But in general, around the world, we are just seeing a slow but gradual enslavement of mankind as people who have to survive, struggle, and survive by working. Um, I don't know. It's very difficult to say, but it's like not this kind of predict what was predicted. You know, the sudden decline and everything collapses. But we are just slowly we're falling into this kind of zombie-like existence. We're hating each other. We're living in a fake world with all AI. We have to work hard to survive. Prices go up. We have to rent everything. We cannot own anything anymore. And what you're saying with the whole Palantir situation, we're being controlled and spied on by all these crazy people and these spy organizations. And that also was something that I wanted to say about this whole what was his name, Alex Karp guy. I remember one of his interviews in where he said that, I think it was Alex Karp, where he said that
Craner.
no, Karp, what's this guy, this Karp guy of Palantir.
Founder
Oh,
of
Alex Carp.
Palantir.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Alex Karp. And where he said, people, you have to continue, we will spy on people in every situation so they will be on their best behavior. Was that Alex Karp? Yeah. And then even
Probably.
so, and that includes toilets, that includes cameras in toilets or spying on them in toilets. And I was like,
Or
I
if
kid you
they're
not.
with their mistress, he also said that if they're with their mistress, whatever they're doing, we're watching.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
you just
insane.
become, and let's be honest, they already live these lives. You become total food for their depravities of these sick,
Mhm.
elite, pedocratic monsters. And I don't think people realize that we are really at a how can you say that, a tipping point here, guys. We have been watching now for more than 2 years a blatant genocide. We're now seeing ICE agents kidnapping children, underage children, innocent people based on skin color, now also shooting white women in the face as if it is nothing. So those who thought, oh, it's not going to happen to me, yes, they're now coming for you too. And I think many people do not realize that something has forever qualitatively been changed in this world. We are not living in a protective world anymore. We not even the facade that there are human rights or a judge can save us from any problem, or when we are arrested, we will be treated within the confines of the law. We are literally being conditioned for a world where everything and anything can happen to you and nobody is going to protect you. I find that an exceptionally scary thing to think about, and it keeps me awake at night. And I don't know. It's not really a question. It's all very pessimistic. I'm very sorry for that, but I don't know. Maybe you have some thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would agree with you, and I think the hardest part that's getting in the way of that is this hero worship that is coming from a lot of people that are online. The hero worship of Putin, say, like making Putin a certain figure, the hero worship of any politician that, meets your expectations of what you think a politician should be. The idea that there's going to be somebody from another world that's going to come save us, because it's this mentality of, oh, we're just going to be saved, we're waiting to be saved. And I've seen it so many times online. Oh, don't worry, oh, Russia gave all of these weapons to Venezuela, and China's going to do this, don't worry, they're going to do something. It's like, this idea, and it's not even about Russia or China as much as it is as the people putting these ideological wishes onto these very pragmatic nations that are pretty much driving their actions based on economic interests. And I can say that is happening with Russia because there is going to be a return of a lot of uh, European and American companies already. So while the peace talks haven't really happened now in terms of like resolving the Ukraine war, you need to look at the economic transactions that are already happening. There's a lot of American companies that are returning to Russia. There's Russian media that's going to return to the United States. There's like things that are happening in the background that people don't know about that I can say, well, that wouldn't be happening. And they wouldn't be able to do that if there wasn't a plan to formally try to end this. Because from what we've seen so far, when there was a war, there, and I know this, of course, especially was, there were sanctions. You wouldn't be allowed to be a U.S. company operating. All of these companies left because the U.S. placed sanctions on Russia. But if that's not going to happen anymore, then of course you can return. McDonald's being one of these companies that is in talks. And so the thing is, it's almost comical because if you look at something as dumb as McDonald's, you have the Russians took it and had their own version of it, but we don't know how this was done. We don't know who's driving who. How is this creating a profit? And I think people get lost in the idea that there is an opposition to the United States and it's coming from a major world power rather than that the opposition is more so to the transnational ruling elite. And I think once you think about it that way, when it doesn't mean that they're all in on it, because I also hate the very just simplistic reductionist type of mentality where there's it's just very negative to the point of like, this is me saying that. Apparently, I'm just so negative all the time. But like, it's more so just like saying that there's no ability for us to defeat empire. That we should just give up and do absolutely nothing. And I'm against that too because I do believe there's an ability to defeat it. I just think we're going about it the wrong way, and I think we're not looking at things clearly and openly as they are, but as a lot of people would like them to be, and that's extremely dangerous. And this idea that of AI, for example, and big tech and all of that, the things we need to do to surpass that aren't just isolating ourselves. It's more so actually building communities and building other forms of interaction and communication and being able to get in front of it instead of just waiting for the world to fall apart. I think there's some things that you can do. And yes, the world is literally, quite literally falling apart. But what people need to understand is through chaos, and this is coming from something you mentioned earlier, right? How both sides have made a ton of money in this war. Well, that's the reality. War always brings money, especially in the United States. When we need wars, when we need money, we make wars. So when you're operating like this, when this is the reality, then what we need to do is really get out of that mentality of just defeatism and this mentality that somebody is going to save us. And I think that's a psychological thing that needs to happen too with people as a whole, and with people like us talking about this. It really, I think a lot more people are actually feeling that way, but they hear a lot of this other garbage all the time from people they trust, so they're like, oh no, maybe there's something that's going to happen, the US is going to fall down. And the truth, the other point I want to make here is that when societies do fall down, when the Roman Empire falls, it's the people that suffer the most, the regular working people that suffer the most. And there is something that comes to replace it is usually not better but worse. So just because what we knew as the United States of America is no longer the United States of America and is no longer going to be that, does not mean that whatever replaces it is going to be much better. It is, in fact, likely to be worse because if society isn't prepared to take over or doesn't have a plan to organize something that is better in its place, then what ends up happening is chaos. And they love it because we end up going after each other and ignoring those who are pulling the strings. And that's what's happened with the immigration issue in the United States, the issue all over Europe and the UK. Well, of course there are issues, of course there are problems. And there are, I think there are some people that have valid concerns about what's happening and the manipulations behind it all. But the lashing out comes at the populations that really are the victims here. And so then people don't realize, like, slowly they are just killing us off, as the resources that they're plundering lessen and diminish. And this resource plundering is happening from east to west. It's not just the United States that is interested in resource plundering. We have seen that, and with China and Russia both, they are interested in attaining these resources. They are interested in accumulation of these resources. We can say it's to protect, themselves from whatever, but we can also say it's a transactional type of mentality. And you can justify it, and I think a lot of people justify it for Russia and China, saying that they're not the United States, they're not the UK, they're not the West. But in many ways, what the West was isn't going to matter anymore. And I think we're going to be seeing the differences of empire kind of this disintegrate as we move towards this global type of society where people talk about the global elites. Well, they're already here. This is already happening. This is just now. It's becoming more obvious. And when people fall from this illusion of nation states, that's clearly just every single day that I see it, it's less and less. I think it's going to be hard to accept that. And I think you're also going to see a fight between people that have more nationalist tendencies to try to preserve these countries as they are, and then the people that are just trying to just really focus on the economics. And I think that is what's happening right now. And I think there are fifth columnists everywhere that are posing
Yeah.
as these multipolarity type of people that are, we're going to bring more prosperity to Russia. We're going to bring more prosperity to XYZ. And like, I think it's more so in the interest of an elite class than of these countries themselves. And people within these countries have to realize that. Some politicians have to realize that. I'm sure some of them do. I don't think any of these, for example, speaking of Russia specifically, it's not a monolithic entity. I mean, there's different points of view. There are different politicians. There's different ideologies, and a lot of people there are really seeing the decline of the economy as well. Inflation has been pretty high there. The price of goods has gone up. And people are experiencing a lot of the things that we experience in the US, but just in a different way, because they're in a different a stage of economics. The United States is very much in a late capitalist stage where corporations, as Vanessa stated, are pretty much in the government. They've not only taken over the government, they've embedded themselves in the bodies of government, where they're making the laws that favor them. Essentially, we're not governed by the facade of even Trump or any of those people, where it's literally corporations making these decisions, which is why it's so easy for this Zionist mentality to take over, because at the end of the day, it's just a supremacist mentality that everybody else doesn't matter, and that these people are the only ones that do.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll give it to you immediately, Vanessa, just before I lose all these interesting thoughts that I get again when I hear you guys talk. And indeed, what you're saying, Fiorella, is so important, that's why I always say also in my classes, it's so important for us to start understanding history. We have the tendency to always look at this stage or this period of time, and we ignore history. But if we would study history, you would see that a lot of things are actually very similar. So I liked when you said, like, okay, when an empire falls, that doesn't mean things will be good for us. Let's not forget, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of historians who don't agree on this, but let's not forget that after the fall of Rome, we had approximately 500 years of dark ages. And some are saying we are entering the dark ages right now. You know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong. There are lots of historians who say, well, there were actually quite some positive developments during the dark ages. But there is something to be said that once an empire or a big empire falls, we're going to have a lot of very, very scary developments in our societies. And and another history point that is also so important. I come from a small country, the Netherlands, and the Netherlands people always see that as a very tolerant society and a very open-minded liberal society. But people often forget that it's actually one of my it's one of my most read articles on my Substack. People actually forget that the birthplace of capitalism was Amsterdam. They even teach that here in China, here in Hong Kong at the university. They even teach that, the birthplace of capitalism was the first stock market that was in Amsterdam, and that was the period of time that the Dutch were the most wealthy and most important colonial superpower in the world, right before the Brits and the Americans. And what made the Dutch so rich? They actually invented what we call the East India Company. You also had the British do that eventually, more successful. But the Dutch started with the East India Company, and that was a mega corporation that could transcend national laws, that could make its own currency, that could invade other countries, colonize it, make their own little government, etc., etc. And that's where we're going to right now again. I mean, we're going to these massive corporations like BlackRock that are super powerful, that colonize pretty much societies here in Asia, Latin America, Africa, West Asia, Europe. And these, seriously, how many name, and I am guilty of this, so don't get me wrong. Name 10 very important staff members of the upper regions of BlackRock. I mean, we are all talking about Donald Trump, like you said, Fiorella. We're all talking about political personalities that, like I always call them piñatas, where the public talks about, slams on these public figures and talks about these public figures, while these big guys like BlackRock in the background are the ones who are shaping the policy. And I just saw a leftist show of the in Britain, and I won't name them. I'm not this kind of channel, but these are good guys, so I won't name them. But one of these presenters talked about ICE and the ICE killings, and then he said, "I'm a leftist," and I was thinking, why, when Donald Trump was elected again, why do you guys elect this man for a second time? Please don't do it. Please don't do it. I was thinking, and I thought to myself, you're a leftist. It's time for a systemic analysis. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or not. This stuff has been going on in the United States under the Democrats as well, and imperialism as well. Please, guys, stop it. Like, when are people going to wake up in that sense? It's so incredibly frustrating to me. But then again, you cannot project your knowledge onto other people, because there's also a lot of stuff that I don't know, and probably people think, why doesn't he see this? You know what I mean? Anyway, Vanessa, your thoughts?
Yeah, just quickly on that. It was another point that Simon Dixon made that I thought was, I've talked about it also, but the fact that as analysts or even as viewers and people who have their own opinions, we're kind of herded into sectors of the media which basically agrees with them, right? So what this does is to create complexes of thought that don't really bleed into others, or they don't, as you said, and I'm just as guilty about the whole kind of listening to people talking Bitcoin and economy, because in a sense, it's not something I grasp very easily anyway. And the same, like I was like, oh God, that's just another, section that I'm going to have to get my head around. Like there's already enough that I'm grappling with. But you're right. When I started listening, I was like, oh my God, this ties into everything we're talking about. And it kind of makes more sense of it in some ways. I like to see more of a kind of historical geopolitical context into it also. But that's the thing, when you break out of the corral that they're trying to put you into, you can start making more sense, because you don't have to. It's like people think they have to agree with you on everything. No, you don't. Like, the whole point is to take some of the things that, it's like religion. You can take some things from Christianity, you can take some things from Islam and so on, and you can make sense of the world in your own way. That's the point, right? You don't have to be compartmentalized or partitioned into one way of thinking. You can actually absorb what other people are thinking and make sense of it within your own understanding of what's going on in the world. But one thing that I noticed when you were talking about this amplification of the idea of a World War III or a nuclear war, or the savior complex being in BRICS and the multipolar world and so on, those channels are the ones that are amplified. The ones that are actually pushing the nuclear war, pushing the World War III, pushing the sensationalism and the kind of, and the belief in this savior from whichever part of the world coming in and bringing an end to all of the misery and the suffering and so on. Those are the channels that are actually, it only kind of stupidly occurred to me while we were talking today. They're the ones that are getting tens of thousands of views. And from the minute that they started, they had like 100,000 followers upwards, right? Suddenly, whether it's on X, on YouTube, wherever, Substack even, right? So there's a reason for that. Because the ruling elite want people to be paralyzed and hypnotized into doing as little as possible. Either because, as Fee said, this nihilistic vision that, well, if they're all in it together, what can we do? Might as well just give up because we don't have agency anymore. Or we're all going to be bombed by nuclear weapons, so what's the point? The world will be finished. Or World War III, the same thing, right? So it's the kind of doomsday messages that are being amplified through social media and through channels like YouTube and so on. The other point is that all the countries that are under attack, if we look at it from a transnational ruling elite perspective, they're all the countries that have maintained their independence in their banking, in their investments, and from a financial perspective, right? Whether you look at Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, Yemen, Iran. And then the last point that I wanted to make, which I'm still kind of working through in my mind, and I'd be interested to see what you two think. So we've had these recent kind of Mossad, CIA uprisings in Iran, similar to every single Arab Spring and so on, the same tactics, snipers on the roof, blah, blah, blah. Iran has to some extent been successful in shutting down the internet and also apparently shutting down even Starlink. But so we've had how many days of the protests and, the amplification again in the media that there should be regime change in Iran and so on. But what happens? Trump puts tariffs on, which again brings it back into the economic sphere, into the transnational investment economic sphere. He takes it away from a war arena or a regime change arena into that investment global capitalist sphere. He did the same thing in Venezuela. We had the dramatic kidnap of President Maduro. It's not even a regime change. The regime is still in place. But what's happened, he's squeezed out Russia and China from the oil supply from Venezuela. Basically, the Venezuelan Bolivar government has always not had a problem, certainly under Maduro, correct me if I'm wrong in this, with building a relationship with America that is based on respect of their sovereignty, on the basis also that their entire oil industry is very much dependent on US technology and machinery and so on. So they need actually that US investment because they know Russia and China are not going to get involved from that perspective, right? When I speak to diplomats or officials from Venezuela, they don't have the same idealistic view of Russia and China. They really don't. They're not dependent upon them from an ideological perspective. So, from their perspective, if Russia and China are not really going to do anything to,
And if I may quickly interrupt for a second, can you hear me?
yeah, yes,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, if I may quickly interrupt for a second, even
mm,
Chinese themselves, I talk with my students all the time. Chinese
mm,
students who understand the world, and they have a much less idealistic understanding of their own country when it comes to international
interesting.
relations and imperialism,
Uh,
etc., etc. But it is the
Russia.
Western often presenters and
yeah,
pundits who come with this savior kind of status, also with
yeah.
Russia. Yeah.
And it creates a state of almost apathy. Because if people, again, as we've said, if people follow this belief or this projection of ideology, then they actually stop doing anything themselves personally to prevent what's going on, or even to protect themselves from what is going on. Right? That's even a more important point. So if you look at these two situations, Venezuela and Iran, which both of them looked very dramatic, everyone in the channels that are amplified, we're talking about war in Iran. They've been talking about war against Iran for some time. People here were saying, no, we don't think it's going to reach that point. And they're absolutely right. For me, this is about, as we've said, economic, transnational, globalist capital control. And these ignitions of what looks like it could evolve into war are purposely to create the conditions in which they can maneuver from an investment, from a capitalist perspective. I was just kind of thinking this when I saw that Trump had immediately put tariffs on Iran. Basically, anyone that wants to deal with Iran is going to be affected by the tariffs. And so his tariffs now is almost this globalist capital weapon, because it redirects wealth, it redirects investment. Someone told me the other day that a lot of global capitalists are moving their investments to China, for example. So the weakening of one sphere of influence is going to enrich another sphere of influence. And to me, that's what war is becoming now, much more than an actual kinetic war or a nuclear war or World War III. We've kind of already had World War III to some degree for the last 20 years, in my opinion.
Yeah,
So I'd be
you can't.
interested to
Well, just to respond to that, what you said about the transactional nature of this, you can't make a good profit if you have nuclear annihilation, right? So, like, I think for these people right now in the world we're in, while has been screaming about World War III, or has been saying Trump is playing seventh dimensional chess and he's actually going to take out, the global elite, I think that the reality is they are just simply trying to take as much as possible of the resources in for this incoming fourth industrial revolution, which we are seeing the AI, we are seeing big tech, we're seeing the amplifying of, for example, self-driving cars now. That's apparently a thing now, and it's all of these things that are being pushed. But I also think the AI industry itself is also very volatile. It's very vulnerable because a lot of people are putting so much faith and into it. But it's basically a circle jerk of the three biggest companies funding each other, and there's a lot of emphasis on its success, but it's just so much money that it's going to be impossible to generate a profit. So it's just like a circular profit, like that's just being handed from one to the other. And I think we're also meant to think that we're not going to have a role to play, that the majority of people aren't going to have a role to play in society in the future because of the incoming of AI. They're trying to get people comfortable with the idea of, say, a what's called a universal basic income. They try to sell this as a leftist idea that if you just get paid money, then you can do something else and you can do great things. The problem is that comes with requirements of you abiding by said state and set rules. And what we're seeing here is we can kill people. And the thing is, like, what happened with ICE, right, with this lady being shot 3 times in the face. We saw a genocide for 2+ years, and we saw children being burned alive, being killed, being bombed, babies being tortured, killed. We've seen it all now. So after Gaza, it's almost like the veil fell and everything else is now fair game because we already did that. So there's nothing else that these people can do. They're literally just things are escalating and escalating and escalating, and people are just letting it happen because they're letting themselves be divided by politics. I mean, when you talk about this thing that happened with ICE, there's people defending the actions of this ICE agent based on the fact that the woman was a lesbian and had a wife. I mean, it's just you're driven into these little corners in order to justify what everything they need you to justify next time, right? And next time it'll be a Republican that'll be shot or something, and the left will cheer for it. I mean, this is what ends up happening, and where we're at, I think, in society, is that while that is happening, while there's all that chaos, there's these transactions happening, there's these conversations being had, and there are deals being made where people are making a lot of money, and that's it. And you need a good business deal, and you need chaos, but you don't need nuclear annihilation for a good business deal. And the economies of the United States and China, for example, are actually tied up, just like Vanessa mentioned. Venezuela largely being open to economic, diplomatic and economic relationships with the United States. They've always been open to that. And this is what's led people to say, well, you know, Delcy Rodriguez sold off Maduro because it's impossible. It's like, but they've always been this way. In the same way, you can even say, Russia and China have been open to having relationships with the United States for the longest time. I mean, this is nothing new. The reality is, our world is not. It's not possible to live in isolation. And if you're a major superpower, or if you want to exist without being pretty much destroyed, there's going to be some transactions that are happening. And that's what people need to understand. It's not. It's very pragmatically driven. And I think for Venezuela, though, they've been an enigma because they've been able to maintain their sovereignty through careful planning. They haven't just been able to be ousted. You got rid of Maduro, but you didn't get rid of the spirit of Bolivarianism. And that's something that is going to be extremely difficult for the United States to get rid of, particularly because they know their history. And as you mentioned, Kareem, the history is very important. And when you understand history, you understand what is coming much better, and what is actually happening in the present. And Venezuelans really know their history. They know what's happened up until this moment. They know about Chavismo. They know about all of these things. So they're able to more so navigate these waters where there is going to have to be a different way of functioning. But I do worry about that at times, because I do worry about what the intentions are of these actual sovereign and independent states like Venezuela, which in Latin America are few. You have Venezuela, and you have Cuba, and you pretty much Colombia and Brazil are pretty much like teetering on the line. And again, all of them have relationships with the United States. Before Petro, um, Colombia was very involved with the United States. Colombia has been the only NATO partner in the region, in South America. And then you have Mexico, for example, where Donald Trump can't even, he'll threaten Mexico, but he can't really do much because our economies are tied up so well together. I mean, it would actually hurt the United States. So I think a lot of this stuff doesn't happen in the way that people ramp it up to be like, even Venezuela, for example, the way it was, people thought it would happen, where there's going to be hand to hand war like this, GI Joe boots on the ground, like in mass. That wasn't going to happen, because that's not, it's it prevents any sort of transactional affair to happen. Really, it's not the U.S.'s modus operandi right now when it comes to its operations. What it did, it's able to sell it better in how they did it. How they captured Maduro. So I think what a lot of the times we end up, screaming World War III. What ends up happening is a more transactional type of event. That's just not everything that people thought it was. And then the people that have been saying that just ignore it and move on, and they just continue, you know, like pretending and saying the same thing for the next thing. Oh, it's World War III again. And I just have a hard time understanding why people still listen to these people, but whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is something I think we all should really think about, and I think we need some serious online media literacy among us anti-imperialists, leftists, whatever you want to say, because I don't think people realize enough. And I'm talking about people I have a lot of respect for, and I follow them and I look at them and I watch them. But I don't think people have really grasped the fact how much we are manipulated. And I mean with that also the algorithms, how much the algorithms are manipulating us. And I often write that also in my articles on Substack. Nobody Nobody breaks through the algorithm without the explicit support of at least one group of massive elites. And you're not going to tell me that the sudden breakthrough of Nick Fuentes was completely organic. That is impossible on privately owned, billionaire owned social media platforms that can literally, with the push of a button, decide who becomes a millionaire and who does not become a millionaire. Can you imagine what these guys can do by just feeding one person a little bit of algorithmic success? That person can suddenly turn into a millionaire or even multimillionaire. So you can have these billionaires can literally choose who gets rich, who gets not, who gets attention, who doesn't. You're not going to tell me that a Nick Fuentes, whose sudden rises is like, oh, the most canceled person in America, whilst not a single serious leftist anti-imperialist breaks through. And when a little, or not little, when actually a relatively successful stream like Africa Stream gets completely banned on all platforms. So you're not going to tell me that is organic. Same with Shapiro. All the crap that guy says about other human beings, and that is apparently all according to you could say that's all according to the YouTube standards and the guidelines. And I mean, I'm talking about serious, disgusting stuff. But somehow, when you discuss, let's say, a war or something terrible happening to Palestinians, then it's against the guideline and you need to be deplatformed. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that people often do not realize that algorithms are the modern mainstream Fox News. They are ways to shape our mind into certain ways of political thinking that keeps us kind of indoctrinated into this, in campism, in this kind of red versus blue identity issues kind of thinking. And I see very serious YouTube channels that I regularly follow with leftists, anti-imperialists, spend so much time on all these figures and why this is happening, and oh, they're so anti-Zionist and they are this. Serious, these guys would not break through if they don't function. They don't serve a function. And of course, luckily, you can see it right now with a guy like Nick Fuentes, who is subtly supporting what is happening in Palestine, or at least the defending of the defense of the Israeli state. They defend their own people, and he supports suddenly what's happening in Venezuela. This is not a coincidence, guys, and many people saw through it. You just didn't want to listen. And it's the same with what's her name. I always use her as an example. What's her? I'm sorry, I had you muted, Vanessa. I had you muted, so I can't hear you. So what's her name again? I think you know who I talk about. Tulsi Gabbard. No, yeah, Candace Owens. No, Tulsi Gabbard. It was the same thing. Like nobody wanted to listen. That this woman is not kosher. To use a very fitting word. She's not kosher. And of course, eventually she turned out to be not kosher and very pro war on terror. And she worked for Trump and she did all these identity issues. So I use that example, all those examples, that I also think we have a serious lack of social media literacy, political literacy. There's in so many ways we're all falling for all these narratives. And that brings me to what you just said, Fiorella. The fact that people are, it's baffling, but people are defending the ICE officers to the extent that and you will always see that it doesn't matter how bad the stuff that's going on is, people keep defending it. And I'm thinking in myself, guys, this can happen to you. This can happen to your mother, your sister, to anyone you know. Are you sure you want to defend this? Because when you see that woman driving in a car, these ICE officers do not have a radar in their brain saying, "Oh, she's a lesbian. Oh, she's a leftist." Guys, it can happen to anyone, and it really reminds me of that poem. What's it again about the Second World War? First they came for the communists, but I said nothing. They came for the Jews, but I said nothing. They came for the leftists or something. All these things, and then they came for me, and there was nobody left to protect me. And you see the same thing happening now. You see the same thing happening now. It's absolute. So sometimes I wonder: are we ever going to learn as mankind? You know what I mean?
Yeah. A question that I ask very often. Are we ever going to evolve out of the endless cycle of empires and wars and kind of sectarian partitionist thinking? I hope so. But the problem is now that the system that keeps us in a compartmentalized state is far more sophisticated than it ever was before, of course. So we're actually going to have to evolve way further than previously to break out of the kind of the bubble that we're being forced to live in, basically.
Yeah. Well, we're already at almost 1.5 hours, so I guess we can end it here. We can always talk so much. There's so much more to discuss, but we can keep that for another time. Again, this was fantastic. Unfortunately, we're in a pessimistic moment, so we cannot end on a very positive note. But what can I say? There's only one way. It's up to us, I guess, up to the common folk, the normal people, to try and stop this and not wait for some kind of savior to save us. But I guess we have to keep going with these kind of conversations, and hopefully we can wake some people up, and up to a better world.
I think from a positive perspective, just quickly, I think both Fee and I have noted that people, ordinary people, though I don't like that they're actually extraordinary people, are starting to wake up, because you can see from the reactions on social media that they're not taking it anymore. They're not accepting narratives as quickly as they would have done previously. And so I think that is an indication that people are starting to understand the world a lot better and letting go of a lot of the kind of mirages that they've been fed for some time, but I think they're now starting to see through that.
Yeah, yeah, it's same as what they try now again with the whole Iranian women's rights. And then I'm like, are you seriously, really, Western people? Are we really gonna fall for this stuff again after 2 years of ongoing genocide
Oh,
against women and girls? It's just, it's just baffling to me. But indeed, luckily, more and more people are
yeah,
waking up, and you start to question all the narratives that have been fed to you. That was also what I saw on this show with Simon Dixon when he said, well, first we had
mm,
the fake war on terror, and I was like, I like it the way he calls it, fake war on terror. Yeah, because if you
yeah,
think about it, considering that ISIS and Al Qaeda and all these groups are funded by the U.S. imperialism, you realize like what was actually going on in all these decades, when we still believed like, oh, they're going into Africa, AFRICOM, and fighting all these extremists. No, this was they were just already doing all that imperialist stuff, and they were telling us that they were so-called fighting the people that were actually their militias. You know what I mean? But anyway, sorry, I'm already entering a new discussion. Let's not do this now, but next time. But yeah, thanks a lot, guys, and hopefully see you soon.
Yeah.
all right. Thanks, Gary.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. Bedbeat medium makes you feel. No borders, no change. No silence